The subject I'm going to talk about today, however, is one subject with respect to which that is not true. With respect to the area of international trade, with respect to the question of whether it is desirable for a country to have free trade or to have tariffs and other restrictions on imports and exports, in that particular area, economists have spoken with almost one voice for some 200 years. Ever since the father of modern economics, Adam Smith, published his great book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776, the same year in which the Declaration of Independence was issued in this country, ever since then, the economics profession has been almost unanimous on the subject of the desirability of free trade. Of course, complete unanimity is hardly ever possible, and every once in a while there have been some deviations from the straight and narrow path. Almost always, those deviations have reflected not a disagreement with the fundamental message of Adam Smith, not a disagreement that in the good world free trade would be the best of all possible courses, but they have tended to reflect special circumstances of the time. Perhaps the most famous such deviation was by the most noted, and some would say notorious, of the modern economists, John Maynard Keynes, the English economist who gave his name to the Keynesian Revolution. In 1931, in the course of the Depression, John Maynard Keynes, who had been a free trader all his life, came out in some articles in Britain in favor of departing from free trade and of introducing tariffs. He did so not because he thought that was in and of itself the best policy, but because he thought that the best policy was politically unfeasible. In his view, the right policy for Britain at that time was to go off the gold standard, end a fixed exchange rate, allow the pound sterling to be a free market currency whose price would be determined in the market, as it now is, of course, in a world of floating exchange rates today. But Keynes, an economist, made the political judgment that it was not politically feasible for Britain to go off the gold standard. Tariffs are a step, are an alternative to devaluation. After all, it comes roughly to the same thing if on the one hand the price of the pound sterling was changed from the $4.80 some, which then was the price, to, let's say, $4. That would make British goods cheaper to foreigners. It would make foreign goods more expensive to Britons, and in that way it would redress the problem of the balance of payments they were facing. That's one way to do it, and the best way. But he thought that was politically unfeasible, and it comes to the same thing to introduce a tariff on imports and a subsidy to exports. That's an indirect and concealed form of devaluation. And so Keynes came out for that concealed form. His political judgment was, like that of many economists, flawed, and about 3 weeks after he came out for a tariff on these grounds, Britain went off the gold standard. I may say that this is not an isolated story. Time and again, economists, in my opinion, have erred when they have proposed second-best solutions in the area where they are experts, namely economics, because of predictions they make about political feasibility in an area where they are not experts. At any rate, Keynes had a very flexible mind, and 1 week after Britain went off the gold standard, he retracted his support for tariffs. He published an article saying, now that we've gone off the gold standard, there is no longer any point to tariffs. I returned to my free trade principles. But later, when he reprinted that retraction in a book of essays, he appended a footnote, which is a very revealing footnote because it shows how much damage can be done by the tendency for people to preach the second best solutions. And he said in his footnote, and I quote, "Not all my free trade friends proved to be as prejudiced as I had thought. For after a tariff was no longer necessary, many of them were found voting for it." In other words, it's often easier to turn people in the wrong direction than it is to reverse that and get them back on the right line. Now, as